Spirit portraits photographing the dead in Victorian times.
Welcome to an exploration of one of the most fascinating and eerie phenomena of the Victorian era, spirit photography. During the 1860s, a peculiar obsession gripped society on both sides of the Atlantic. This was the belief that cameras could capture not just the living, but also the spirits of the departed. As photography was still a relatively new and mysterious technology, many believed it possessed almost supernatural powers. The Victorian age was marked by profound grief, especially following devastating wars and epidemics, and this created fertile ground for the emergence of spirit portraiture.
What is spirit portraiture photography?
Spirit portraiture refers to photographs that purportedly show the ghostly images of deceased individuals alongside living subjects. These ethereal figures would appear translucent, hazy, or partially visible, often hovering near their living relatives or loved ones. The phenomenon emerged in the 1860s in America and quickly spread to Britain and across Europe. It's important to distinguish spirit photography from other paranormal imagery. Spirit portraits specifically claim to capture the actual presence of the dead, not just mysterious shapes or orbs. This practice became a global sensation, offering grieving families what they desperately sought: visual proof that their loved ones lived on in some form beyond death.
H. Mumler, the pioneer.
The story of spirit photography begins with William H. Mumler, a Boston engraver and amateur photographer. In 1861, Mumler claimed to have accidentally captured the spirit of his deceased cousin while taking a self-portrait. This image would change his life and launch an entire industry. Mumler quickly became the most famous spirit photographer in America, attracting clients from all walks of life. Perhaps his most notable client was Mary Todd Lincoln, the widow of President Abraham Lincoln. After her husband's assassination, she sat for a spirit photograph that appeared to show Lincoln's ghostly hands resting on her shoulders. This image became iconic, lending credibility to Mumler's work. However, his career was not without controversy. In 1869, Mumler was put on trial for fraud in New York City. Although he was ultimately acquitted due to lack of concrete evidence, the trial exposed many of the techniques used to create these supposedly supernatural images.
The cultural context, Victorian spiritualism.
To understand why spirit photography flourished, we must examine the broader cultural landscape of Victorian society. This was a nation, indeed a civilization, haunted by grief and driven by curiosity. The American Civil War had claimed over 600,000 lives, leaving countless families shattered and desperate for comfort. Similarly, in Britain, high mortality rates from disease and childbirth meant that death was an ever-present reality. The rise of spiritualism offered hope. Seances became fashionable social events, and mediums claimed to communicate with the dead. Photography fit perfectly into this worldview. If mediums could channel spirits through sound and touch, why couldn't cameras capture them through light? The Victorian era was also a time of rapid scientific and technological advancement. New discoveries were made almost daily, and the boundaries between science and the supernatural seemed fluid. Photography itself was barely 20 years old when spirit photographs first appeared, and its mechanisms remained mysterious to most people. This combination of grief, hope, and technological wonder created the perfect storm for spirit photography to thrive.
Frederick Hudson, Britain's spirit photographer.
While Mumler pioneered the practice in America, Frederick Hudson brought spirit photography to Britain. Starting in 1872, Hudson operated out of London and became the most prominent spirit photographer in the United Kingdom. He worked closely with Georgiana Houghton, a spiritualist artist and medium who helped authenticate his work and attract clients. Hudson was meticulous in his approach, carefully staging his photographs and documenting his sessions. He created elaborate albums showcasing his spirit photographs, which were circulated among spiritualist circles and served as both evidence and advertisement. These albums often included testimonials from sitters who claimed to recognize the spirits that appeared beside them. Hudson's work represented the British approach to spirit photography, which tended to be slightly more formalized and connected to the spiritualist movement than its American counterpart.
How it was done, the techniques.
The creation of spirit photographs relied on several photographic techniques, most of which involved deliberate manipulation. The most common method was double exposure, where the photographer would expose the same photographic plate twice, once with the living subject and once with another person posing as a ghost, often draped in white fabric or gauze. By controlling the exposure time and lighting, the photographer could make the second figure appear translucent and ethereal. Another technique involved using pre-prepared plates that already contained a faint image. When a new photograph was taken on that plate, the previous image would appear as a ghostly figure. Some photographers also used painted glass slides placed in front of the lens, projecting additional images onto the scene. Darkroom manipulation was another tool in the spirit photographer's arsenal. Chemicals could be used to add or enhance ghostly figures during the development process. These techniques were closely guarded secrets, and successful spirit photographers went to great lengths to maintain the mystery surrounding their craft. It's worth noting a quote from the era: "The camera cannot lie, but the photographer can." This encapsulates the central deception of spirit photography. People trusted the mechanical objectivity of the camera, but they underestimated human ingenuity and the desire to profit from grief.
Why people believed.
Understanding why so many intelligent, educated people believed in spirit photography requires us to consider several factors. First, there was a fundamental lack of photographic literacy among the general public. Most people had no understanding of how cameras and photographic processes worked. The technology seemed almost magical, and if it could freeze a moment in time, why couldn't it also capture things invisible to the human eye? Second, grief is a powerful force that can cloud judgment. People desperately wanted to believe that their loved ones were still present in some form. A spirit photograph offered tangible evidence that death was not the end. The emotional need for comfort and connection often outweighed skepticism. Third, the Victorian era saw a blurring of boundaries between science and spiritualism. Respectable scientists investigated paranormal claims, and new discoveries like X-rays and radio waves proved that invisible forces could indeed be captured and measured. This scientific context made spirit photography seem plausible. Finally, there was social proof and confirmation bias at work. When prominent figures like Mary Todd Lincoln endorsed spirit photographs, it lent legitimacy to the practice. People tended to see what they wanted to see in these images, interpreting vague shapes as beloved faces.
The skeptics and frauds exposed.
Not everyone was convinced by spirit photography, and a growing chorus of skeptics worked to expose the frauds. In 1869, as mentioned earlier, William Mumler faced trial for fraud. Photographers and magicians testified about the techniques used to create fake spirit images, though Mumler was ultimately acquitted. The showman P.T. Barnum was instrumental in the investigation, having commissioned his own spirit photograph as evidence of the fraud. In 1872, the British Journal of Photography published detailed explanations of how spirit photographs were created, educating the public about double exposure and other tricks. Throughout the 1870s and 80s, numerous spirit photographers were caught and exposed. Investigators would sometimes plant accomplices who would later appear as spirits in photographs, proving the deception. By the 1890s, spirit photography's credibility had largely collapsed among educated audiences. However, the practice never completely disappeared, continuing in various forms well into the 20th century.
Why this still matters, from spirit photos to digital deception.
You might wonder why we should care about Victorian spirit photography today. The answer is that the lessons from this era remain remarkably relevant in our digital age. First, it reminds us that seeing is no longer believing. Just as Victorians were deceived by manipulated photographs, we today face an unprecedented era of deepfakes, AI-generated images, and sophisticated photo manipulation. The technology has changed, but the capacity for deception remains. Second, spirit photography teaches us about the psychology of belief and the power of grief. When we desperately want something to be true, we become vulnerable to manipulation. This applies not just to supernatural claims, but to misinformation and conspiracy theories in the digital age. Third, it highlights the importance of technological literacy. Just as Victorian audiences needed to understand how cameras worked, we today need to understand how digital media is created and manipulated. Education and critical thinking are our best defenses against deception. Finally, spirit photography reveals something profound about human nature, our eternal struggle with mortality and our need for connection. While the methods have changed, the fundamental human desires that drove spirit photography remain with us. We still seek comfort, we still grieve, and we still hope for evidence that our loved ones are never truly gone.
Conclusion.
As we close this exploration of spirit photography, let's reflect on a thought-provoking observation from Daily Art magazine. Spirit photography was not just about capturing ghosts. It was about the Victorian era's obsession with seeing and believing, a reminder that truth and illusion often dance together in the dim light of the darkroom. This statement beautifully encapsulates the entire phenomenon. Spirit photography was a product of its time, reflecting Victorian society's unique combination of grief, hope, technological wonder, and the eternal human desire to transcend death. While we may look back with amusement at how easily people were deceived, we should also recognize that we face our own versions of these challenges today. The tools have changed, but the need for critical thinking, media literacy, and compassion in the face of grief remains as important as ever.